I've always been a very big fan of lost media, and it's for good reason. I'm always super fascinated with the details of how something became lost, what is known, and the search to find it. I've already discussed lost media a handful of times on this channel. However, sometimes when I want to talk about something, it's either something that doesn't have enough information to make its own video, or something that's already been talked to death. So I decided to start a new series on this channel called Lost Media Cases. Before starting, allow me to point out a few things. Firstly, this series was heavily inspired by Blame It On George's Lost Media Case File series, which you should go check out after this video. Second, at some points during the series, we may be diving into some pretty sensitive topics, so if you want to skip out on those, I will leave timestamps in the description if you ever want to skip a certain entry and move on to the next. Lastly, if any of you have ideas as to what should be part of the next entry on this series, then please leave a comment down below or email me using the email in the description. Anyways, let's get started. Let us first talk about a game that I'm sure you're all familiar with, Minecraft. Indeed, one of the most famous and beloved games of all time has its fair share with lost media. In fact, there are several lost versions of Minecraft that are unable to be played, mostly due to the game gradually updating as time goes on, and many of these versions being early builds that were made before the game truly got popular. In fact, there are a total of 91 lost versions of Minecraft as of me releasing this video, with many found versions in between. Obviously, I'll only be talking about some of the more important versions of the game on this list, since talking about each and every single one would take way too long. Before we begin talking about them, however, allow me to explain a few things about Minecraft itself. First of all, I'll be looking over all the versions from May 16th, 2009, which was the date the very first version came out, to November 13th, 2011. These are the versions that are previous to the current version of Minecraft now. Secondly, there are 5 different development cycles of Minecraft that came as it was being produced. These cycles are called Classic, InDev, InfDev, Alpha, and Beta. I'll label which groups are in which versions of the game when we talk about them. Another note I feel I should mention is that many early versions of Minecraft were updated extremely often, usually within a single day. This means that many of these early versions are lost, and most likely permanently so. Lastly, Minecraft has a really bad history with fakes of lost versions. What this means is someone will modify an existing version of Minecraft and pass it off as a version that was lost. Considering how popular Minecraft got and still is, there were a whole ton of fakes that were found that were being spread as supposedly lost versions of Minecraft. Thankfully, it's easy to identify fake versions of the game, meaning we won't have to worry about mistaking one of these fake versions as real. Anyways, let's go over some examples of lost versions of this game. Version 0.0.9a. This was the very first version of Minecraft that was ever released. This version was a semi-private release, meaning that it wasn't completely public. Obviously, considering its obscurity and the fact that this was the first version of the game to be released, it is currently lost and it's unlikely we will ever be able to uncover it. 0.0.15a-1. The first version to showcase what is known as the quote-unquote multiplayer test. As the name implies, this version included a multiplayer version of the game, and was the very first version to have a form of it. This version is actually found, with multiple versions of this version existing. As of now, 3 total versions of this version are known to exist, but there might be more that are undocumented. 0.0.16a-02-1 is an interesting case. Before, there was a client that had supposedly linked a piece of evidence to version 0.0.16a-02-1's existence, but a screenshot from a forum called Bay12 Games predates this client by about 10 hours, meaning a re-upload of this version had occurred. Sadly, this version is still lost, but it's still an interesting case. 0.24 Survival Test. Another version known as the survival test, this version included a supposed test version of the survival mode. This was also the version that began to simplify the version naming scheme, removing the 0.0 at the start as well as the A at the end, making the naming scheme more simplistic. this seemed to be an unreleased development version of the game, so henceforth it has remained lost to time. 0.28. After the survival test versions, this version reverted back to creative mode. Despite this, version 0.27 that came before would not prove to be the last survival test version. As of now, this version is currently lost, but it may be found sometime in the future, considering its next release, 0.28-01, was found. 0.30 is another interesting version. 4 known versions of this version are known to exist, with 3 of them being found and 1 being lost. The ones that are playable were found throughout various different means. The last that is lost is yet to be found. InDev 201000128. A very important version of Minecraft, this version is the first to contain working crafting. Considering its notoriety and popularity, this version of the game is found and can be played. InDev 201000206. The first version of the game to contain farming, and is seemingly the first version of the game to actually be labeled as InDev in the game itself. Despite this, it has yet to see the light of day. InDev 201000223. The last version of the InDev cycle. The very last version of Minecraft before the infinite worlds were introduced. This version is also found, and thus we move on to the cycle known as InfDev. InfDev 201000321. The existence of this version of the game was only recently discovered when it was sent to an archival group by RidgeX. Regardless, this version is found, albeit very mysteriously so. InfDev 201000629. This version is known as the Offline Client Tech Test. Furthermore, it was released as a downloadable offline Java executable just one day before the official launcher was released. Noting the differences in launcher types for this version of the game, it wasn't very hard to find this version. Alpha 1.0.1. In addition to one of Minecraft's Secret Friday updates, this version is sadly lost, unlike the other 2 Secret Friday updates that came before. Alpha 1.1.1. This version contains the final Secret Friday update, and is the only one of the Secret Friday updates to actually be released on a Saturday, strangely. Despite being the final of these updates, it currently sits as lost. Alpha 1.2.1 is another odd instance. This version, labeled as 1.2.1, is actually 1.2.1-01, which was a future update released the same day as this version, which is found. While this version is technically lost, it being identical to a found version makes this a confusing version of the game. Another odd version of the game is Alpha 1.2.3-05. This version was accidentally labeled as Alpha 1.2.4 in Minecraft creator Notch's blog posts. To this day, it is unknown if Alpha 1.2.4 exists. However, Alpha 1.2.3-05 has been found. Beta 1.3-1. This is a debug version of the game that gives the player 64 torches, 64 beds, a diamond pickaxe, shovel, and axe as soon as a world is made. The version is strangely titled B1.3b, indicating that perhaps a version B1.3a and B1.3b genuinely exist out there somewhere. Regardless, this version has managed to escape the Lost Realm. Beta 1.6 Test Build 3 is a test build that was placed to Mojang's public download servers and sent to specific people for testing. As of now, it is unknown as to how many people downloaded this version, but it has since been found. And finally, Beta 1.9 Pre-Release 4-1. This version was solely released to fix the version number of a previous version, still being Pre-Release 3. While the re-upload can be gone on Mojang's download servers, this version remains lost. Although there are countless versions discussed here, there remain many more lost versions that still remain to be found. Many separate versions don't even have known changes in between them, which makes them even more difficult to find. Lastly, allow me to discuss each development cycle in detail. I'll discuss what the cycle is known for, how many versions in said cycle are lost and found, and how long each development cycle lasted. Starting with the classic cycle, this was, of course, the first public development cycle of Minecraft. Originally called Alpha, it was only referred to as the classic cycle after it ended. Classic is perhaps most known for how obscure it is, with most of its catalog of versions being lost, with only a few remaining versions that have survived. Of the 69 total versions of the Classic cycle that were made, 53 remain lost to this day, with only 16 versions that managed to survive thus far. This development cycle lasted from May 16, 2009 to November 10, 2009. Seeing as this cycle of development only lasted around half a year, it's easy to see with 69 total releases how many of them managed to become lost. The next development cycle was the in-dev cycle. This cycle was well known for introducing many concepts and features, such as crafting, farming, and mining. While the in-dev builds were still played on browsers, much like those in the Classic cycle, there are more found versions in the in-dev cycle. However, many in this development cycle are still lost, sadly. Amongst the 36 builds released in this cycle, 15 have remained lost, whilst the additional 21 have thankfully been found. This cycle of development lasted from December 23, 2009 to February 23, 2010, lasting just 2 months surprisingly. Next up is InfDev. Standing for infinite development, this cycle is most well known for introducing infinite worlds, and its entire lifetime was spent in just survival mode. Like its 2 earlier cycles, it was played in the browser, but was proven to be the last before Minecraft used the launcher. Almost every single known version of InfDev is found surprisingly, but there still remains just a couple versions that have slipped through the archives. A total of 27 different versions for the InfDev cycle are known to exist, with there only being a single version missing, that being InfDev 201.00616. This development cycle lasted from February 27, 2010 to June 30, 2010. In such a short span of time, it's still surprising how almost every version of this cycle was able to be recovered. Alpha was the development cycle that followed the InfDev cycle. This one was well known for being the first cycle to feature a launcher that was isolated from a browser. Despite this, however, the entirety of the Alpha development cycle remained in survival mode, much like the InfDev cycle. Sadly, many Alpha versions are known to be lost today, but not as many as in both the Classic and InDev cycles. Throughout the Alpha cycle's 25 total versions released, 10 are currently missing, while the remaining 15 have safely been recovered. Alpha's development cycle lasted from July 2, 2010 to December 3, 2010. Finally, there's the beta development phase. This was when Minecraft's popularity was at its highest, meaning that every full beta release has been archived. Despite this, there are some re-uploads of certain versions that were not fully archived, meaning there are still some missing versions of the beta cycle. Lastly, the beta cycle was well known because after the cycle was completed, Minecraft's original creator Notch left Mojang. From the 14 total versions of the beta cycle, only 4 versions remain missing, with the remaining lifetime of Minecraft's development only holding 8 missing versions. The cycle's development went on from December 22nd of 2010 to November 13th, 2011. So while many of these supposed missing versions have safely been found, a huge chunk of Minecraft's history is actually completely lost. While we can still hope that new versions will occasionally arise from time to time, we may never discover all of these versions, especially considering the context and obscurity behind some versions in particular. The entirety of Minecraft may never be fully complete. If there's one place where you wouldn't really expect to find anything utterly creepy or disturbing, it'd have to be Nickelodeon. Well, it just so turns out that our next entry takes place in perhaps one of the most unexpected places. Our story begins on October 28th, 2000. A Halloween-themed comedy horror TV film aired on Nickelodeon's television block named Snick. The film in question was titled Cry Baby Lane. This movie, which aired on this peculiar night, would prove to be an odd little hiccup in Nickelodeon's air history. It never received any kind of home media release, was never aired in any other place outside of the US, it would never re-air for over a decade. Because after its initial premiere on October 28th, it would mysteriously vanish, never to be heard from again. After the film suddenly vanished, some online fan sites from the early 2000s would occasionally pop up here and there talking about the film's existence. At this time, when people tried contacting Nickelodeon asking about the film, they would deny knowing anything about the film. Furthermore, some employees would say that it never aired on television to begin with, and some also claimed that the film was just a myth. Many speculated why these false claims were made, with one reason seeming very likely and fairly obvious, stating that the movie had gotten complaints from a wide margin of parents, claiming that the horror-themed yet kid-friendly film was too scary and inappropriate for Nickelodeon. This massive outrage was what pulled the trigger for Nickelodeon to pull the film from re-airing, and disproving its existence when asked by researchers. So what made the film so scary? Well, the film was based off of an urban legend that one of the film's creators had heard of when he was a child. A father once had conjoined twins and was apparently so ashamed of them that he hid them away throughout their childhood. Eventually, the conjoined twins, one being good and the other being evil, caught a mysterious illness. Soon, both boys succumbed to the illness, and the father, not wanting the town to discover his secret, decided to separate their bodies and bury them in different places. He buried the good boy's body in the local cemetery, and the evil boy's body in a desolate dirt road called Crybaby Lane. It is said that those who ventured down Crybaby Lane at night could hear the cries of the evil brother from beyond the grave. Now, going towards the movie, it begins with a group of twins venturing down to the cemetery to perform a seance, cause why not, right? However, after the seance is held, they soon learn that the father who had buried the kids had actually made a mistake. He had buried the evil kid in the cemetery where the seance was held, and the good kid at Crybaby Lane. It soon turns out that the cries that are heard in Crybaby Lane were the cries of the good kid crying for help. However, by the time they discover it, it's too late, and the evil boy goes out and begins possessing the townspeople. Of course, seeing the film's pretty dark tones, it would be easy to see why an explanation like this would be easy to come to. After all, the film does have some pretty dark stuff behind it. In particular, two scenes were cut from the film, one of them being a scene that alluded to skinny dipping for some reason, and another that depicted an old man's head fused onto the body of a baby in a cemetery. Yeah, considering both of those scenes, it would be easy to assume why this film was banned after just one airing. As for the scenes that did make it to the final version, there are some scenes of the film with writhing worms, broken glass, and animal skulls. Further scenes also include the empty eyes of possessed victims, as well as multiple scenes where a child gets swallowed by a grave, prompted a massive outrage by parents claiming that it shouldn't have been something to air on Nickelodeon. However, seeing its wide obscurity, only airing once and being scrubbed off the face of existence afterward, many people even questioned if the film even existed, and this image in particular was very important and interesting during this time, as it was seemingly the only still of the film to exist at the time, and for a long while, that's how the search went. However, the true search didn't begin until 2011. It was at this time that a viral Reddit thread regarding the film had caused notoriety and interest in it to peak. At this point, many people were on their way to try and find this film. Although various other contact forums did sprout up from 2007 to 2011, the film didn't become incredibly well known until 2011. Of course, people still had doubts that the film existed, with some claiming that the story of Crybaby Lane fell in line with many lost episode creepypasta tropes. However, many were still determined to try and discover this film, in the hope that it was out there somewhere. After that, it was simply a matter of waiting. Thankfully, it would prove that people wouldn't have to wait for too long. Later in 2011, a user on Reddit going by the name of Fire Salad Peach claimed that she had a bootleg VHS tape of Crybaby Lane, claiming that she had recorded the film on the night it aired on Nickelodeon. Naturally, many were speculative of this post, but as it turns out, this user would soon find out to have been telling the truth. After searching around for the VHS tape, it was later uploaded to a file sharing website, and soon it was also uploaded to YouTube. This garnered hundreds of viewers to watch the film, and due to the popularity of the Reddit post that was made about the film, it gained an overall positive response once it was finally found. People even think that this overly positive response from the movie's resurfacing prompted T-Nick to re-air Crybaby Lane that following Halloween night. Ironically, they proclaimed and advertised the movie to be Nickelodeon's dark secret, in that it was so scary it was banned from TV. Eventually, this airing led people to discover that the film, which for the longest time was believed to be kept away because of its disturbing nature, was never actually banned from TV, but instead the film was just simply forgotten about by Nick, and after seeing the positive reception after the film's resurface, decided to finally release the movie once again after over a decade. So, now what? Well, the movie is thankfully safe from being lost again, and it can be publicly viewed on YouTube as we speak. Although, I still have one question lingering in the back of my head from all this. Remember how earlier I mentioned people before who tried to contact Nickelodeon about the movie who were told that it never aired on television? Well, if it was just simply forgotten, why would those other employees try to cover up the fact that it existed? I just think it's strange how they suddenly changed their mindset from the period of time regarding the film, but even then, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Perhaps the film truly was banned at one point, back when the parents who all complained about the film had forced it to be shelved. However, as time went on, the movie simply did become forgotten by Nickelodeon, and after seeing the positive response to the film from the Reddit post and the thankful resurface of it by the Reddit user who had the VHS tape, they decided to dig it from the vault they kept it in and release it. There are still a few things that are needed to be answered, such as the company's sudden turnaround regarding the film, since after all of what I said regarding Nickelodeon's feelings towards it as time went on is just speculation, and the oddity of just how quickly it became found once it became popular. I mean, simply having been recorded on VHS on the night it aired seems too simple an answer. Perhaps there's something else? We may never know, but for the time being, this case is closed. To end off this video, let's talk about something a little more ancient. Specifically, we're dating back to the late 1890s. Dracula is, of course, one of the most famous monsters ever created. Originally created as a gothic horror novel by Abraham Stoker in 1897, the book follows Count Dracula, who plans to move from Transylvania to England. Afterwards, Count Dracula has made a huge name for himself, and after his first official movie debut in 1931, Dracula has been relatively well known in film today. What Dracula fans may not know, however, is that his original 1897 appearance was not the first reincarnation of the titular vampire. In fact, the topic of today, titled The Undead, was supposed to be the original name of the Dracula novel, before Stoker did some research and replaced the name with Dracula. The original manuscript, seeing as it is simply an early version of the story that is popular today, wouldn't have been expected to delve too far away from it. However, seeing its ancient history, having been made over 120 years ago, you would expect that finding any kinds of remnants for it would be insanely difficult. In fact, you could expect finding any traces of it to be one remarkable achievement to your life. Well, there have been some instances of pieces and tidbits of the manuscript being found throughout the years, though the full manuscript is still lost today. The first bits of the original manuscript were first found in 1980. They were found in a barn in northwestern Pennsylvania, and surprisingly, quite a bit of the manuscript was found in this location. It even included the ending of the said manuscript, albeit alternate than from the finalized story, which featured Dracula's castle being destroyed after his death from a volcanic eruption. The text also just heavily varied from the finalized story in several different ways, with the ending being a good example of that. However, something odd was found amidst this piece of the manuscript. Several crossed-out sentences were found throughout the text, seemingly referencing sections of the manuscript that were still missing. To give you an idea of how much of the manuscript was missing, the first 102 pages weren't, and still haven't been found today. This led people to question what the first 102 pages were like, what happened to them, and where they ended up. As of now, the manuscript is currently owned by Microsoft's co-founder Paul Allen, but the search for the rest of the manuscript continued. Afterwards, small bits and pieces of the remaining 102 pieces have been uncovered, or at least resurfaced. One example was that of a collection of short stories made by Abraham Stoker in 1914, titled Dracula's Guest and Other Weird Stories. It is currently believed by Stoker's great-grandnephew Decrease Stoker, which I probably mispronounced, sorry about that Dracula's Guest, which is one of the short stories in the collection, has the first 17 pages of the original manuscript. It features an unknown main character who is an Englishman, who he believes is the main character in the finalized story, going by the name of Jonathan Harker. Some proof connecting the original manuscript to Dracula's Guest has been found, further solidifying that these two stories are connected. Some of the several crossed-out sentences of the manuscript reference events that occur in Dracula's Guest, which seem to further prove that the short story was originally part of the novel. However, we still don't have concrete proof that these stories are connected, although the coincidences seem to line up a bit too well. Lastly, let us talk about Powers of Darkness. Powers of Darkness, otherwise known as Merkrana, is the Icelandic version of Dracula. It was published in 1901, just 4 years after the original story was released, and was translated by Valdemar Asmundsson. In 2014, a literary scholar named Hans Cornel Dilroos was able to unearth the original version of Powers of Darkness. As it turned out, the original version of the story had originally been serialized in the newspaper Jalkanan, which happened the year the story was published. Upon unearthing this original version of Powers of Darkness, Hans discovered that the story was not simply an abridged translation of the Dracula novel. Instead, Powers of Darkness was actually a quite different story that differed from Dracula extensively. While many were quick to claim that this simply could have been a case of fan fiction and not immediately connecting to the original manuscript of Dracula, it was soon learned that it was actually translated from a variant of the Dracula novel called Morkut's Makter. Why is this important? Well, the variant was supposedly written for the Icelandic version of Dracula by Stoker himself. So we have some clear connections, but it isn't enough to wholeheartedly connect Powers of Darkness to the original manuscript. Sure, they were written by the same guy, but that doesn't immediately make them the same. Sadly, there isn't really any other proof to fully connect the Icelandic version of Dracula to the original manuscript, seeing as it's all just manly speculation. It is still interesting how Powers of Darkness is its own story nonetheless. Going into the text itself, it was incredibly different from the story of Dracula. It featured whole new characters, plot elements, sections, events, and motivations. The book also had a much larger focus on eroticism and violence. In fact, it is believed that due to this much larger focus on violence, that it was actually meant to be based off of real events. However, these were cut out from the decision of the editor, due to something very serious and major going on shortly before the book was released. So, what was it? I'm sure many of you are familiar with Jack the Ripper. He is often cited as one of the most famous serial killers of all time. He often targeted the impoverished areas of London, seeking mainly prostitutes in the area. He has been known to kill at least 5 people, but it's very possible that he killed even more. His murdering spree went on from 1888 to 1891, which was about a decade before this book came out. While it was quite a bit ago since the book was in its state, ready to be released, it was still a worrying factor to present some of the subject in the book after the murders had taken place. As a result, the supposed topics of real-life events taking place was removed, to avoid seeking controversy amidst the book being released. And after that, we haven't really found anything else regarding the lost manuscript. While a good portion has been found and is currently safe from being lost, we may never find the remaining 102 pages of the manuscript. The bits of what is supposedly made up of the missing 102 pages is merely speculation, and it's also likely that none of what we found that we think relates to those missing pieces is even connected at all. There are also questions as to what we do have. The found pages suddenly being found in a barn seems too odd. Where did they come from? Why were they in the barn when they were found? And where were they in the time span that they were lost? After all, they would have spent a little over 80 years in complete obscurity, so them being just found in a random barn in Pennsylvania seems too weird an answer for me, and the rest of the missing pages have now spent over 120 years in the void. It's likely that they may never be recovered. And with that, we are done with today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I'm hoping to do more videos on this series, and also be sure to comment if there's anything you like or didn't like. I want to make this series as enjoyable to you guys as I can. Also, feel free to comment anything you want me to talk about in the next episode. I won't be talking about stuff that's already been talked to death about, but other than that, it's usually fair game. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Goodbye, and I'll see you next time.